Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bassam Haddad, and I'm joined by Dr. Ghassan Abu-Sittah. Very delighted to have Ghassan with us again. We had a podcast on in this past summer in the long form or part of long form podcast, and we are happy to have him join us again to address disability and the future of Gaza. Before I say hi to Ghassan, I'd like to say a couple words. Ghassan Abu-Sittah is a renowned medical practitioner who has worked in war zones in Palestine, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. Familiar with patterns of Israeli warfare, he immediately booked his travels to Palestine upon hearing news of the October 7th, 2023 attacks, and was among the first doctors in Gaza on October 9th. For 43 days, he treated wounded and maimed. He treated the wounded and the maimed in the besieged Al Ahli hospital, from where he also shared with the world that Israel's atrocities in Gaza produced a new medical term: Wounded Child No Known Family, WCNKF. Abu Sittah's medical mission was also on advocacy, um, and he appeared on media outlets globally and exceeded the questions about humanitarian conditions to narrate a story of structural, colonial, and racial violence. His advocacy has only increased since leaving Gaza and includes being elected as the rector of students at Glasgow University, establishing a fund to treat children in Palestine and Lebanon, and currently establishing a division on war medicine at the American University of Beirut to train new generations of able practitioners. We will be addressing a number of topics. His bio is extremely long. We will actually have it in full on the Jadaliya post that will appear after this conversation. Ghassan, Kifak, how are you?
يا هلا يا أهلا وسهلا.
Ghassan, we will try not to keep you long. It's already 9:30 p.m. in Beirut. We would like to start. I'd like to start by asking you about the question of disability in general. If you can just put the question of disability in context in terms of statistics and developments since, I guess, during the past 2 years, and then I'll address the other parts in just a moment.
So, over the last 2 years of the genocide, we have had over 100,000 wounded in Gaza. A third of them have been left with life-altering disability, many of whom, probably around 30,000, still need medical intervention. Half of the wounded were children. We know children who have war injuries need between 8 and 12 surgeries by the time they reach adult age. Gaza now has the world's largest cohort of pediatric amputations, and the war in Gaza has produced the largest number of amputees. It is estimated the number of amputees as a result of the war in Gaza, i.e., those still inside Gaza and those who have been taken out for treatment outside, is somewhere between 7 and 11,000. The children are around 2,000 to 2,500. There's a further several thousand outside in Egypt, in Doha, in UAE, and in the countries that have received them. And we have around 300 who have spinal injuries, 1,000 who've lost vision and have been blinded by war injuries. And so the phenomena of disablement and disability is one of the legacies that this genocidal war is going to leave for generations to come.
Before we move on to your mission and your advocacy, can you clarify for us the distinctions between disability, disablement, and mutilation, and the overlaps and how they are different? I understand some of these terms are also political or have a political dimension.
Disability, I mean, basically, war injuries will leave patients with physical disability as a result of the nature of the injury, i.e., damage to either the limbs or damage to the brain and the spinal cord. And these happen in these wars, particularly with the use of the intentional use of things like quadcopter snipers that were inflicting that kind of damage to increase the number of wounded. Disablement is the intentional creation of disability through injury and through the intentional denial of treatment, so that otherwise reconstructible injuries become untreatable and either end up in amputation of the limb or increase the residual disability that the patient would have been spared had they had access to healthcare. And so we saw in Gaza, as a result of the intentional destruction of the health system, the intentional denial of access to much needed medication and surgical consumables, medical consumables, that a lot of the amputations would have been prevented had patients had access to healthcare during the last 2 years. And speaking to patients who who I'm treating in Beirut, they tell me that their initial injury would have been salvageable had they been able to get to a hospital and receive the treatment. And uh, uh, um, we know from our colleagues, from Dr. Mohammed Abeid, who's currently in Israeli prisons, that he was towards the end of 2023 and the first half of 2024, having to perform amputations on limbs that he knew could have been saved had these patients been able to access healthcare at the right time. In addition, those who have been left still with fractures of the long bones of the limbs, around 20% will still need delayed amputations as a result of failed reconstruction. So we're looking at a mammoth number of disabilities and people left with disabilities in a terrain that has been intentionally destroyed by the Israelis. Anyone looking at footage in Gaza realizes that it is even difficult for an able-bodied person to navigate the plowed roads, the rubble in Gaza, let alone someone who's been left with a disability. Add all that to the destruction, the intentional destruction of the two prosthetic centers that were in Gaza, Hamad Hospital and the prosthetic center run by Gaza municipality. So we find a kind of almost within the catastrophe, a second catastrophe buried inside it of injury and intentional disablement. Now, with regards to mutilation, we saw this. Because mutilation is a very uniquely colonial form of injury that was there as far back as the Belgian occupation of Congo, where the Congolese, the children of the rubber plantation workers, would have their hands intentionally chopped off as punishment. And we saw it in Gaza during the Marches of Return, when Israeli army snipers shot 8,000 young Palestinian demonstrators, 90% of them in the lower limbs. We saw it in Lebanon in the pager attack, which stands as humanity's largest act of intentional mutilation. And the aim of mutilation is that the body of the victim will always carry in it an encryption of the power and the omnipotence of the colonial power, the settler colonial power. The mutilated body carries with it the signs of an altered body, altered by the presence of an all powerful colonial power.
You know, Ghassan, I'm always in this belief regarding how far and how long this has gone, and it's remarkable that the depth of the immorality and brutality and barbarism continues on the one hand, and there's so little action, if any, like actual action besides discursive action. And in that context, I understand that you have or you are working on a number of efforts regarding advocacy, but you're hitting, you have some challenges still out there, as if this is or any of this is controversial, especially given the topic. This is like almost beyond political, especially from the quote unquote other side, notably in Europe. Can you tell us a little bit about these challenges and what you are facing today, and what efforts are you leading?
So the sheer magnitude that has been unseen, the world has never seen this number of children with amputation. And so, in terms of the magnitude, in terms of the continued denial of access of humanitarian care and humanitarian aid into Gaza, Israel's refusal to allow the health system to be rebuilt means that the majority of these patients have not been able to receive even the rudimentary prosthetics that they would need to start their rehabilitation process. The destruction of the health system meant that there were, when we did the study a month ago, 1,000 amputees who were still waiting for the final surgical procedure that would allow them to start wearing the prosthetic. And so that means that these wounded remain in limbo, unable to access the services that they would need to start the process of rehabilitation and the prosthetics and the reintegration.
Um, Thank you, Ghassan. Can we now move a little bit into the question of um, timing and chronology? Just a little bit of a background into the passage of time from the very beginning until today. What or how did the question or the actual statistics regarding disability and mutilation, how have they changed? And on the one hand, and then on the other hand, uh, what is the status of the healthcare system then and now, say the first year and the second year up to this moment? Uh, it's almost unbelievable how people are still being treated in some way, that there's still an effort. People are, you know, you know, understand that there is a severe lack of tools and medicine and so on. So how is all this proceeding compared to the earlier period? And if you can share with us some insight on these topics, especially in chronological order.
So, since the ceasefire, 1,000 patients who had been on the evacuation list have lost their lives because of the denial by the Israelis of their of the fact that they had agreed to opening Rafah border to allow the wounded to leave. And so these wounded had been waiting in the remnants of the Palestinian health system since the ceasefire. and have lost their lives. Many more will lose their lives unless they're allowed to leave Gaza for treatment, and so that medical teams and much needed field hospitals and consumables and medication are allowed into Gaza, so that the rest of the wounded can start getting their treatment. The health system and the wounded remain in suspended animation. Israel has reneged on all of its commitments as part of the ceasefire. And so the health system has barely been able to treat the wounded. We know that there's a complete lack of external fixators, which are the metal rods that you need to treat war injuries, specifically fractures in war wounds. And so we have a situation in which there is an intentional policy to kill those who are wounded and to further deepen the disability that's left from the injuries of those who survive.
What about what about the corollary topic, which is very controversial, and often when it's brought up, people are accused of all sorts of all sorts of things. The question of organ theft and how it's related to all of this, and I know that you've actually addressed this, and you had some serious pushback. Can you tell us a little bit about this, and probably if you can tell us also if this is something that just started after the genocide, or is this something that has a history?
So I was asked a few weeks back as a recommendation from the Ministry of Health, to view pictures of the bodies of Palestinians who had been returned by Israel as part of the ceasefire exchange of the remains of those who were killed. And there were 4 bodies that were found to have been missing vital organs. And these were very carefully documented. And I was sent the photographs. And the photographs showed medical intervention to remove the heart, lungs, kidneys, and liver of these 4 patients and these 4 prisoners who had been taken prisoner alive by the Israelis and harvested. One of them, the daughter says that the father gave himself up to the Israelis. He had been working as a laborer inside the Green Line. And after December 10th, when the Israeli authorities ordered all of the laborers working within the Green Line to hand themselves in, he was alive, and he called them to tell them he was going to hand himself in. And so I saw these pictures. I gave my opinion that this was a surgical intervention, that this was done professionally in order to harvest these organs. And more importantly, that there was previous evidence that the Israelis had done this. All the way back to 2009, Ian Black, who was the Middle East correspondent for The Guardian, had spoken to someone who was an Israeli, I think, technician, or one of the pathologists who had worked in Abu Kbair Forensic Center, who said that they routinely harvested the organs of the Palestinian bodies that had been handed over to the center. And then we have, from the Times of Israel, over the last 10 years, several articles about Israeli organ harvesting rings for the sale of of these rings, of these organs, all of them run by Israelis with security links. And so you have a situation where there's evidence, there is a long history of doing this that's discussed openly within the Israeli media. But the minute you bring this out into the Western sphere and public discourse, you are immediately attacked. And there was an article against me by the Telegraph, one by the Times. The Israeli embassy in London produced a press release accusing me of being a fraud and of blood libel. And so that's what has been happening. And we believe that that was there from the very beginning.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I've lost you now.
Sorry, I was on
Yeah,
mute.
go ahead.
This is all quite distressing, Ghassan. I don't know. I don't know what to say. Let, let's uh, let's move forward to talk about the question of the future, like disability and the future, and perhaps not just even in Gaza and Palestine. Um, we have seen reports that speak to some of the consequences, intended or not, of this scale of disability. What can we expect, and how might people, institutions, states, non-state actors contribute to what we are likely to see once the dust somewhat settles? Because I do not believe it's going to settle completely with the existence of Israel's, settler colonial status.
So, if we look at the situation in Lebanon, the legacy of the previous Israeli wars, the civil war, the pager attack, which left around 4,000 with disabilities, around 400 lost both eyes, including 30 children. 90% of the wounded have had amputations or partial amputations of their hands. 15% of the kids that I was seeing who were wounded in the Israeli war on Lebanon have ended up with an amputation in one of their limbs. Then you look at Syria and the war in Syria and the legacy of that, the legacy of the American invasion in Iraq, and after that, the war in Mosul, the bombings, the Iraq-Iran war. Disability and disablement is now a phenomena that's both a medical phenomena but also a social phenomena, and therefore needs to be a legal phenomena that we need to address in the region. We need to address it culturally because these wounded are being, uh, uh, well, the discrimination that the disabled will face in terms of their legal status, ensuring protection against discrimination, and even in terms of urban planning. When we have such a huge cohort of citizens who are being denied access to the majority of buildings in our cities and in our towns and villages in the Arab world, we need to address this issue as a society, as countries, as governments, and even as practitioners of law and practitioners of medicine.
I don't know what's happening with my mute situation today. So, as to the question of the current status of the ceasefire and how it's impacting not just the questions that we are addressing, but also in general. I would like to just pivot a little bit before we continue to your thoughts. I know that you are, and then, you're following play by play, step by step, like so many of us, and you're closer, you're in Beirut. You've also been in Gaza and you've established a lot of relations and connections, even from before. Can you tell us what are we witnessing today, and how do you see it in general from a broader perspective, but also in terms of where this is going in terms of the topics we're addressing?
The genocide that we witnessed over the previous 2 years was a project. It was a machine that was taking Palestinian lives, not just directly by the horrific bombing and killing that we saw, but through the destruction of all of the components of life, from the physical to the biological to the social, so that all of these conditions are weaponized in order to take Palestinian lives, from the epidemics to the famine to the denial of access to healthcare to the destruction of people's homes. And what we've seen after the ceasefire is the continuation of the genocidal project without the same amount of bombing. There's still, I mean, today they killed 4 people, wounded another 17, I think. There's daily killings. But what continues in the genocidal machine is the famine, is the epidemics, the denial of the entry of tents and shelters means that Israel has also weaponized the weather. And so we've had over a dozen children die of hypothermia as a result of what's happening. So the genocide is happening quietly in a way that has allowed Western governments to placate or at least decrease public outrage so that Israel can quietly continue wiping out the population in Gaza.
Where would you suggest one goes to find a full archive or record of at least the aspects we are discussing? Is there a place or a
Yeah.
URL or an institution that you recommend that one looks
So,
into?
so the report that we did on disability and rehabilitation in Gaza is on the Welfare Association website, and I'll send you the link so that you can add it to your website. And the number of the wounded are in the WHO country reports that come out, and the Ministry of Health reports that come out on a monthly basis. The numbers are there. The catastrophe is the numbing effect of the numbers, and the fact that it's no longer on people's TV screens and smartphones, while people still continue to die of hypothermia, of malnutrition, of preventable illnesses, either as a result of the destruction of the sewage and water, and so the rampant infectious diseases, or through the denial of access to medical care for chronic, non communicable diseases that, once left untreated, become killers.
Ghassan, before I ask you the last question, or at least the last محور, or last dimension, can you tell us, given your comparative experience, can you tell us if you've witnessed anything like what we are witnessing today? I know that you have been extremely active and forthcoming in other zones. I don't want to call it other conflicts because I don't think this is a conflict. Can you tell us a little bit comparatively as whether what we're watching is how different is it? I mean, it doesn't have to be unique, but how different is it, and what can it be compared to from your experience?
I certainly, from the very beginning, it was obvious that this is a genocidal project, not just a war. The war was part of the genocidal project. And so, in terms of magnitude of killing, but also in terms of the weaponization of all aspects of life into the genocidal project that we saw, is unprecedented. The fact that a lot of the violence is performative is critical, I think, to re-establish a world order, a fascistic world order, because what the genocide and its anti-humanist brutality has allowed to do was a return of anti-humanist fascistic ideologies to power in the global north. And what we see in the United States, what we see in the United Kingdom, is a result of what the genocide has allowed to happen. This dehumanization of Palestinians was critical for the dehumanization of people of color that's happening in the United States, and the dehumanization of people of color that's happening in Europe, particularly in the United Kingdom. Sorry, so this is the Beirut electricity that's decided to give up the ghost.
N-
Everything
n-
that has happened today.
Malish, we can actually continue. This is
Yeah,
if you're okay with it.
yeah, absolutely.
Um, did you want to finish or should I move on?
No, we can move on.
طيب هلا well, the last question or the last dimension is lessons learned, and the black screen is a fitting screen, so to speak. Let me see if this will um, no, this will not help.
It's
Okay, there
back.
we go.
Okay.
Uh, so Ghassan, there's no way to actually encapsulate the lessons that one has learned from this genocide. But if we want to, start addressing what we have learned from an ongoing genocide, where would we start, and where can we end?
I think historically we start with a re-evaluation of what we had um, wrongly identified as a end of colonialism and a post-colonial war and imperialism. The genocide in Gaza is an American, British, German, French, Italian genocide, with Israel as the implement of that genocide. And so we see now that global capital is as comfortable with genocidal wars as it always has been, but did not need to return to that tool until the war in Gaza. And so we see Gaza and we read it as a return to 18th century, 19th century, 20th century genocide by global capital. We need to see what is happening in the global south as a continuation of Western colonialism rather than an evolution into something that it was less barbaric than old-fashioned colonialism.
Well, uh, I am I'm out of words. I'd like to push you to unpack a little bit, but I know how late it is where you're at, and I promise you a shorter conversation. Before we break, do you have any words of advice for people in the medical profession or aspiring people aspiring to join the medical profession? Do you have any words of wisdom or advice regarding what they can do in general in terms of uh, realities like the ones that we are witnessing? Usually, people try to go into certain professions to advocate, whether it's law or the social sciences, or they just become activists, journalists, artists, and so on. But in your profession, to the younger folks who are interested in these issues as well, because obviously uh, there's a lot to do. Do you have any words of advice?
So we have to see Gaza as being a watershed. Never has there been a war where the clinical space, the health system, has not been so central to the battlefield as Gaza has been. The Palestinian health system was envisaged by Israel to be central to its efforts to create an uninhabitable Gaza. And the Palestinian health system and those in it have been central to the resistance against genocidal erasure and ethnic cleansing. I think what we had previously known as scorched earth policy that had developed in the 50s and 60s when the majority of the global South's population lived in rural areas. In the 21st century, when the majority of the world's population, especially in the global South, live in places that look like Gaza, scorched earth means the destruction of water and sewage, the destruction of health, the destruction of the intentional assassination of health workers, because they constitute the essence of habitability in these urban areas. And so, medicine now we will see as being central to the conduct of war and to the resistance against the erasure of colonial genocide.
Uh, shukran, Ghassan. I have a lot of things to share or ask about, but I'm going to end it here. And I would like to pursue with you some of these links and the information that you shared, that you said you will share, and we will have it perhaps even on the actual screen. Shukran, Ghassan, for your generosity
Yeah,
always and for joining us. And I understand that we left out a couple of things that are very interesting that you and I had discussed, but maybe for another time, because you said that in January, February, you're working on these matters. So we probably will bother you again. Apologies in advance.
thank
Shukran,
you. Thank you for the invitation. Yeah, hala.
shukran, Azizi. Salam.
Yeah, hala. Yeah, hala.